In the last episode, we were looking at how struggle refines us and how it builds our character, how it can beautify us, in other words. And I guess we can now emphasize that point by looking at the flip side of the same coin. In other words, how a lack of struggle spoils our character. There's a saying about the cyclical nature of history that's worth remembering. I love this saying. I often think about it, in fact. It goes, good men produce good times. Good times produce bad men. Bad men produce bad times, but bad times then produce good men. And then you just repeat that ad infinitum throughout history. History just keeps repeating itself over and over in that cycle. In the previous episode, we were considering how bad times produce good men. In other words, how struggle refines our character and how it beautifies us. But we could also consider the inverse of this saying, which is that good times produce bad men. In other words, endless ease tends to spoil our character. You see, without the hard times to refine us, to purify us, to sanctify us, to strengthen us, the unfortunate truth is that humanity tends to become self-indulgent, hedonistic, complacent, selfish, flabby, weak and timid. We become, of a type, bad men. Or at the very least, without some difficulties in our lives, we don't tend to reach our full potential. I'm an avid football fan, and something that I can't help but notice is how many of the top players in the world come from difficult, impoverished, or at the very least humble backgrounds. And really, it's the difficulty of their beginnings that kind of sets the stage for them to succeed in life. I was listening to a podcast recently where Rio Ferdinand was talking about his rise to the top. Rio Ferdinand grew up in a humble council estate in East London, but eventually became regarded as one of the greatest and most decorated English centre-backs of all time. He was asked in this podcast about what fueled his success, and the theme that he kept returning to time and time again was the struggle.
A young kid, I used to travel far and wide to go and play football, to just go and train with one of my best mates, travel through like a traveller's camp where it can be a bit tricky getting through. There's dogs, wild dogs hanging about and stuff, and people. Only one thing, my dad never let me win anything as a kid.
So
I never won. So I was striving to be successful at something. So whether it's playing cards against him, or playing tennis against him, or running, racing him, or chasing him when he was on a bike. He used to make me run, and he'd go on a bike and say, "Chase me." I was always the youngest in my group of friends, and they're all like 3, 4, 5 years older than me. So as a young kid playing football, that's good, because you're playing against people who can dominate you. The majority of them are quicker than you. So you've got to find other ways to beat people. These guys, they treated us like adults, kicked you, smashed you all over the place.
How did you react to that?
You couldn't react, because if you react like a baby, they're going to take you off the pitch. Or you showed any type of fear, or you wasn't up to it. So again, you've got to prove yourself quickly. So that environment was really, again, I always remember that's a good environment to grow up in as a young kid, because in a cage playing football against these people, there's no way out. But the moment you cry off or something like that, then you get abused. Yeah, if you're a baby, you're not playing with us. If you can come in here and take the kicks and take the bruises and take being pushed to the floor and be good enough technically with the ball, then you can stay. I was 13, 14 years old, mate. 14, I had a growth spurt, as most kids do, and I became like Bambi on ice. No coordination. I couldn't put a ball where I'd normally put it. Just the coordination had gone completely, and that lasted probably 8 months.
A lot of footballers will tell these stories of hardship in their early life, strengthening and toughening their character and their resolve, so they were prepared to succeed in life and take on the difficulties ahead. In a sense, bad times create good footballers, at least. But what I find interesting is that once these footballers reach the top, they of course become millionaires, living in the biggest mansions, driving luxurious cars, and it's into these good times that their children are then born. And it's very noticeable how the children of rich, famous parents are often spoiled by that background. Not just footballers' kids, but celebrity children in general. The kids grow up having everything put on a plate for them. They have no adversity, and all the challenges are smoothed out in advance. They aren't allowed to experience failure because the parents will always step in to prevent it. The kids know that they will inherit their parents' wealth, so they have nothing to strive for. They have no real goals. Often they have doors opened up for them through nepotism. And without this opportunity to struggle, which is a blessing really, and therefore to develop endurance and character, they're almost ruined by the ease. That's what it is. They're ruined by the ease. They become aimless, flabby, they become spoiled, lacking drive, work ethic, humility, determination. Often they're not very happy either. They're into drugs and alcohol. I'm not putting pictures up right now because I don't want to be rude about anyone's kids, but I'm sure that we can all think of some celebrity children that have had life so easy that they seem to have been spoiled by it and they just seem unhappy, miserable and aimless in life. In fact, this is alluded to in that Rio Ferdinand podcast, so I should say that I'm not referring to his kids. He actually seems to be very well aware of this pitfall.
I'm a massive, as you know, I'm a big advocate of failure and the importance of failing to move forwards. It's the only way of finding sort of where your limits are. And I think we equip the kids now, we're all parents sitting around this table, we equip our children to not fail, don't we? We make sure that things are put in their way so they always have a sort of nice, smooth path to success. But actually, that growth spurt where you turn into Bambi on ice and you suddenly couldn't play football to the level that you were, and there were doubts and question marks, that again is such a sort of formative moment. Like to fail at a young age and then to have to find your, I know you had help from people, but to find your own way around that failure.
Yeah, and be patient. Kids today got no patience. They expect everything on a silver plate now. Everything's immediate, whether it's your social media, all these apps and that, everything's instant. So they expect success to be instant as well, and they expect that whatever they do, whether it's physical activity, work, it's going to be instant success, instant rewards. We reward them ourselves. We're guilty of that ourselves as well. So it's about training them and making them aware that, listen, there are going to be failures. And this is what I say to my kids all the time. You are not going to be the best all the time, and you're going to fail at some times. You're going to lose. But it's how you come. How are you going to react? You're going to cry? Crying is not a problem. It's fine. Cry. But what are you going to do then to stop that emotion coming on again and feeling that pain? And that's what I say to my boys all the time. I used to cry. I was a bad loser. I like bad losers. But now the kids are being taught not to lose. There's no winners and losers anymore. I can't get my head around it. I go into the school and ask the head teacher, well, why is there no first, second and third? In life, there's first, second and third. There's last place in life.
I think they're onto a good point there. It's not just celebrities that spoil their kids through trying to make everything as easy as possible. There's such a level of comfort now in 21st century Western society that even regular parents can have the ability to and the desire to try to make life as easy as possible for their children. Everything on a plate, convenient, instant. They get smartphones at an early age, everything they want. Basically, participation medals are the norm. Nobody's denied anything. Children get used to the world around them, bending to their will. And as a result, without having had the opportunity to, the blessing even, to face adversity and to struggle, their character development becomes stunted and they become incapable of handling difficult situations in life. They've never been strengthened or refined by failure, so they're not equipped to handle real life when it comes, and they quickly become miserable and angry, as a result, ruined by the ease. The truth is that we don't even need to look at celebrity children to see how good times can produce bad men, because we're seeing this in normal homes all around Western society right now. And I think a lot of us are looking at the generation coming up with their woke culture, their safe spaces, their cancel culture and such like, and we're thinking, we've gone wrong with this generation here. This is a generation that may have had things a bit too easy. This story is a good analogy. There was a man who was watching a butterfly struggling to break out of its cocoon one day, but as he watched, it seemed that the exhausted insect just wasn't going to make it and that it would die from the effort of trying to get out of there. It was struggling and struggling, but it seemed like it just didn't have the strength to get out of that cocoon. The man decided then, in his kindness, that he would help this butterfly by breaking the shell on its behalf to create an opening that it could crawl out of. But as the butterfly came out into the world, something strange happened. The man became puzzled as to why this butterfly didn't fly away. In fact, he watched as it lay on the ground, and unfortunately it later died. Now, he later went to an expert and told him this story, and he asked him, why didn't the butterfly fly away after I'd given it all this help? The expert said this, he said, it would have been kinder to let the butterfly go through that struggle of trying to break the cocoon itself, because it's exactly that struggle that builds the strength in their wings that a butterfly needs to fly. The man's intended kindness had actually contributed to the butterfly's death. And that's a picture of what parents are doing to children when they make everything too easy for them. They think they're being kind, they think that they're helping, but actually they're depriving their children of the strength and character that they will need to fly. When I think of the last generation to experience real hardship, I think of those who lived through World War II. They're mostly gone now, but I was fortunate enough to know some of them in their old age. It was my grandparents' generation. They're sometimes referred to as the greatest generation, and if you met them, you would quickly understand why. There was this inner beauty in that generation, an unmistakable and essential goodness in their character. They didn't have much possessions in life, they'd seen a lot of struggle, a lot of tragedy, but somehow through all of the difficulties and hardship, they'd reached the end of their lives with this goodness and a kindness in their spirit. They knew how to face adversity, they had a can-do attitude, they had this stoicism and a sense of duty, and of course Sir Captain Tom Moore captured everyone's hearts in 2020 for those very reasons. When everyone was panicking about COVID-19, he was simply out there trying to do something about it with a smile on his face and full of happiness and positivity. That's why everyone fell in love with Captain Tom Moore. Now, ever since that generation, life has gotten progressively easier over the decades, and it strikes me that as life has gotten easier, the moral character of our society has unmistakably gone into a decline.
I'm driving your car, but I just got a notification that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died! Up! Wake up! Hey, Dad! And I was trying to say, all you people are you're so... This is not what we want. It has to be a joke. I do not believe this is happening. I'm literally about to kill myself, and I'm not kidding.
Now, there are many reasons why our society is declining like this. The first and foremost one being the decline of Christianity in the West. But do you see the difference when you put them side by side? It's just so clear. 18-year-olds going to war, stoic, brave, facing difficulties, full of character back then. 18-year-olds today, still emotionally a bit like toddlers, really, just unable to cope with life on any level, temper tantrums and meltdowns at the slightest difficulties. And part of this difference comes down to this generation having had some hardship and some discipline in their lives when growing up. This generation having had life easy and having had no discipline in their lives. And which ones have turned out the best? Which group would you rather sit down with and have a chat with and have as your neighbour? I don't think it's any contest, really. YouTube recommended to me a Louis C.K. video many years ago. Now, before I continue and the outrage begins, I should say that I know what Louis C.K. did, I know what his stand-up material is like more generally, and my quoting him here is by no means a stamp of approval on his act more generally. He is not somebody that I recommend anyone go out and watch in the main. However, this one video did leave a lasting impression on me, and I think it's quite a profound point that he's making, and that it's worth watching in the context of this particular video. So it's in the aftermath of the 2009 credit crunch, and basically he's making this point that maybe we need things to get more difficult again because ease seems to have ruined this generation.
Those were simpler times, I think. I just feel like we may be going back to that, by the way. But in a way, good, because when I read things like the foundations of capitalism are shattering, I'm like, maybe we need that. Maybe we need some time where we're walking around with a donkey with pots clanging on the sides.
You think that would just bring us back to reality?
Yeah, because everything is amazing right now and nobody's happy. Like, in my lifetime, the changes in the world have been incredible. When I was a kid, we had a rotary phone. We had a phone that you had to stand next to, and you had to dial it.
Yes.
You realize how primitive, you're making sparks in a phone, and you actually would hate people with zeros in their numbers because it was more like, oh, this guy's got 2 zeros, screw that guy, why do I want to... Yeah. And then if they called and you weren't home, the phone would just ring lonely by itself. And then if you wanted money, you had to go in the bank for when it was open for like 3 hours. You had to stand in line, write yourself a check like an idiot. And then when you ran out of money, you just go, well, I can't do any more things now.
Right.
I can't do any more things.
That's it, yeah.
That was it. And even if you had a credit card, the guy would go, ugh, and he'd bring out this whole shunk, and he'd write,
yes.
You'd have to call the president to see if you have any money. And
it's all true, kids. You had to call the president, yeah. It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing world, and it's wasted on the generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you?
Yeah.
I was on an airplane and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane and they go, open up your laptop, you can go on the internet. And it's fast and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, pfft. Like how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And on planes, flying is the worst one because people come back from flights and they tell you their story. And it's like a horror story. They act like their flight was like a cattle car in the 40s in Germany. That's how bad they make it sound.
Right.
They're like, it was the worst day of my life. First of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes. Right. And then we get on the plane and they made us sit there on the runway for 40 minutes. We had to sit there. Oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air incredibly like a bird? Did you partake in the miracle of human flight, you non-contributing zero, that you got to fly? You're flying!
He's right, you know. You would have expected that as life has become easier, we would have become much happier as a result, but instead, the reverse seems to have happened. The world is more convenient, it's less challenging, it's less painful in many ways, and to a large extent, it seems to have produced miserable, lazy, unappreciative, infantilized, self-indulgent, spoiled brats. I know that sounds a little bit harsh, and obviously there are still lots of good people out there in this generation, but I think we can see an essential correlation here. Hebrews is correct. No discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It's painful, but afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. That's why the Bible also says, those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them. If children aren't disciplined and trained through enduring difficult times, they simply get spoiled. Their character growth gets stunted. Struggle really can be a blessing for them. One of the best things that we can do for our kids is to let them toil and even fail occasionally, as Rio Ferdinand said earlier on in this video. One last story to finish this episode. Philosopher Professor Peter Kreeft once explained how he secretly watched his 5-year-old daughter struggling to thread a needle when she was in the brownies. It was very difficult for her. Every time she tried, she hit herself in the finger and a couple of times she bled. My first instinct was to go and do it for her since I saw a drop of blood. So Kreeft's instinct was to spare his daughter this pain. However, he subdued that instinct and he kept hidden in the next room, watching her as she toiled away. Eventually, she got the needle threaded by herself, and as a huge beam of excitement spread across her face, she rushed to find her father and show him her achievement. Daddy, Daddy, look what I did, look what I did. Kreeft in that moment realised that he'd been right to let her struggle. The momentary pain had actually been to her advantage. Now, she had overcome a challenge, she'd learned a new skill, she'd grown in confidence by the achievement, she was happy, she was excited, and her character had developed in the process. He would have robbed her of all of that character development and happiness if he'd stepped in to help her and spare her that pain. Epicurus said that no good can come of struggle and hardship, and a good God would never allow it, but of course he is wrong there. A God who is a good father would absolutely allow it. He would allow it to discipline us, he would allow us to struggle, and sometimes he would even allow us to fail, because that's what good parents do. That's how we grow, that's how we develop endurance and ultimately character. Yes, it is painful in the short term, but afterward it produces a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. Children who never see discipline are spoiled by it. They become miserable in the long run. And of course, God doesn't want that for us. God doesn't hate us. God loves us. And so God is going to discipline us sometimes. He wants us to be refined and beautified so that ultimately we are conformed to the image of his Son, Jesus Christ.